Hi, I'm Bruce Brodkey, and I don't know exactly what day this is today, but it's in January of 2008, and I'm here with my really good friend Ben Nachman, who's smiling behind the other end of the camera. It's good to see you, Ben. I was instructed that I should start out by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born in Omaha on February the 19th of 1946 at Emmanuel Hospital, and I have my parents, of course, are Judge Donald and Gertrude Brodkey. My dad died in October of 1989, and my mother is still alive and is at the Rose Blumkin nursing home. She'll be, if God willing she makes it, she'll be 94 years old on April 30th of this year. And I have a brother and a sister, as a matter of setup. My sister is younger than I, and her name is Amy, and she was born on April the 27th of 1949. My brother, Dr. Frank Brodkey, they're both doctors. Incidentally, my sister's a psychiatrist who lives in Philadelphia. And my brother is a endocrinologist who lives in Janesville, Wisconsin. He was born on December 25 of 1953, and they both lived out of town ever since they graduated from their medical school. So that's a little bit, just have a brother and a sister. That's just a little bit about our family. My dad was actually born in Sioux City, Iowa, on January the 17th of 1910. So his birthday, he would be 98 years old coming in a week or so if he were alive. And my mother was born here in Omaha on April the 30th of 1914. My dad's parents were in they owned a little general store in Sioux City, Iowa, where my dad's father, Harry Aaron, was born in 1879. He actually was born in Russia, and they came to here with his parents when he was about 1 year old, and they settled in Sioux City, Iowa. They had a little general store. In 1913, when my dad was 3, they moved to a little town called Avon, South Dakota. Avon is just north of Yankton and a little south of Mitchell. My dad used to joke that when he left the town that had 601 people in it, and when we went back for a visit in 1959, it said population 600, so he figured that he's the only person that ever came or went from Avon. They lived in Avon, but they had their general mercantile store on a Sioux Indian reservation. And what my dad was very proud of during his whole life is that he spoke pretty fluent Sioux, Lakota Sioux, and absolutely no Hebrew. Spoke a little Yiddish, but it was very good, and it came in handy for him when he became a municipal court judge, and sometimes people who were Sioux Indians would show up in front of him and start talking in Sioux, and he was able to respond. Whether they were being complimentary or not is another issue, but at least he understood it. On my dad's side, I want to continue on with that. He went to Avon, South Dakota High School. His parents, and took his first year at the University of South Dakota in Vermillion. He left there when his parents did, and they moved to Iowa City for reasons that are kind of lost to history. And he moved with them, and he graduated then from the State University of Iowa, and then went to the University of Iowa Law School, where I think he graduated in 1933. And at that time, when he graduated, he not only graduated with high honors and distinction, but was the only person out of his law school class that got a job in 1933 that paid money. He moved back to, of course, during the Great Depression, that was not unusual at all for people to simply work for no wages to attempt to get into the legal profession. He came back to Omaha and started work with a firm called Ziegler and Dunn, who were the ones that were smart enough to have actually paid him a little something to start. Ignatius Dunn was a kind of an interesting character. He supposedly, wrote the Cross of Gold speech for William Jennings Bryan. Quite an orator. Unfortunately, he got disbarred for some bad things that he said in a Supreme Court argument. Ultimately, my dad worked for them for a while. Then right before the war, joined Henry Munsky's firm of Munsky Grudinsky. And I don't know if it was Good and Cohn then, or Mayer and Cohn, with Jack Mayer and Harry B. Cohn, and worked there until the war. And he then headed up the Office of Price Administration in Omaha during the war efforts. After that, went into just private practice and spent a lot of time with Irv Levine in a firm that was called Levine and Brodkey. Left there, and after about a year ran for and became a municipal court judge. Then that was in 1956. In 1960 he ran and became a district court judge. He was the first, incidentally, the first Jewish district court judge in the history of the state of Nebraska. And then in 1974 ultimately was appointed to the Nebraska Supreme Court, where he was on the bench until his birthday in 1982. He also was the Jewish Supreme Court judge, and if you were to go up to Temple Israel Cemetery, and the only thing that is written on his memorial plaque, which by the way isn't a plaque, it's a big stone, it's about 6-7 feet tall, and it says first Nebraska Jewish Supreme Court judge. My mother was the daughter of, my dad, by the way's parents were Harry Aaron and Fanny Brodkey. Fanny was a Galinsky, so that's a little bit of the lineage. They were both born in the late 1870s. And incidentally, because I know I'm doing this for posterity, there is a really, really good website that a fellow named Robert S. Brodkey established. Robert Brodkey was a professor emeritus of fluid mechanics at Ohio State University, and he's done this exhaustive study of the Brodkey family, and he's got a complete genealogy that goes back to pictures of around 1800 of family members, and it's very well done. So if you ever typed into the internet Brodkey family tree or Brodkey family history, it would pop up Robert S. Brodkey, and you'd look through it. But essentially, the family history on my dad's side goes from, on the father's side, it goes Chaim to Eliyahu to Chaim to Harry Aaron to Donald to Bruce. And so that would take you from about 1790 to the present. We have very long generations in our family. On my mother's side, they were from a town in Russia. Ultimately, the name Brodkey comes from Bezbrodko. Bezbrodko is a very famous Ukrainian name. The family were silk merchants at one time in the Ukraine. Then were moved at a certain point in time to a small city named Slutsk in Byelorussia, or maybe it was in Lithuania, but which is a town now of about 100,000 people. And that's the history on the father's paternal side. The family started coming over to the United States with the incoming Russian Jewish migration in the 1880s and 1890s, probably in the first wave, at least as I understand it. Then on my mother's side, skipping over to her side, they were Polish on both sides of the family. My grandfather, Harry Mendel Rothkopf, came over when he was 14 years old, so that had been about 1904. He brought over his four brothers and sisters, and then eventually brought over his father, whose name was Mendel Harry Rothkopf, who's buried up at Golden Hill Cemetery. I never knew my great-grandfather, but I knew my mom's father and my mom's mother really well. My mother's mother was a stock, and so that made her automatically part of the gigantic Shafton family, which includes not only all the Shaftons, but it includes the Ricuses, and it includes the Greens, and it includes the Stocks, and it includes just a whole number of families that have been in the Omaha community for many, many years. The Jacobs, like Morris Jacobs was in the family, and the Goodsons, and there are all kinds of people. That I also happen to have a little bit of a family tree on that was done primarily with the help of a fellow from named Sussman, who lives in the St. Louis area. So we continue to work on that. I think Steve Ricus, by the way, has also done a little bit of work on that. Enough of the family background. I was raised on 51st and Capitol. When I was 5 years old, we moved to 1001 South 55th Street and lived there for about 14 wonderful years growing up. They were really good years. A great school across the street called Washington Grade School. I graduated from there, and I went to the first class at Norris Junior High School, graduated from Central High School back in 1964. Then I moved to Berkeley, California, where I went to school during the turbulent 60s. And I was at undergraduate from 1964 until 1968. And after that, I attended Boalt Law School, which is B-O-A-L-T Law School, which is the University of California at Berkeley Law School. And I graduated from there in 1971. And then, as they say, the rest is history. I moved back to Omaha before I passed the California bar, and to take what I thought was going to be a one-year job, and here we are 37 years later, and I just forgot to move back. But I've been extremely happy to have been in Omaha and practiced law here for all of these years. It's been a real joy and a pleasure to me.
I'd like to go back, Bruce, and hear about a day in the life of the three Brodkey children.
Well, in our house, I'm glad you asked that. When we lived on 55th Street, it was a very small house. It did have 3 bedrooms, though. My parents had a bedroom, and my sister had a little bitty bedroom, and my brother and I, my brother being 8 years younger than I, shared a bedroom. And we mostly got along most of the time, but when you live in the same area, a lot of the time we didn't get along so good. But actually, Frank, if you ever hear this, I'm only kidding. We were all in different schools most of the time as we were growing up, so that we didn't were never in the school at the same time. What we did as kids, though, this isn't a typical day in the life. When we were kids, I remember every year they used to have what they used to call a Brodkey family picnic. And supposedly there were like 1,000 relatives in the Omaha area that were related to the Brodkeys. And we would always go out to Elmwood Park, which was not too far away from where we were, and meet with all these people that we had no idea who they were, how they were related, but they all seemingly were very nice people. So that would be a once-a-year thing we always did at Elmwood Park. And as everybody knows, there's 1,000 people that I'm related to probably are down to about 100 now. But I wish I would have paid more attention at the time. We had a really good, wonderful upbringing that was, in all sincerity, that was a product of having really good parents. There was a very, very close neighborhood. We all played games together, and football and baseball and basketball in the correct seasons. My sister was always involved with cheerleading activities, and we were raised in an era, like a lot of people were, where the principal of your school was the king or the queen of the world. I remember as a kid that my brother and my sister and I would go down over our lunch hour to Jerry Ferenstein's house, who lived 3 doors down from us, where we would play a game called Four Squares. And we played at Jerry Ferenstein's house because he was the only guy who had a double-wide driveway. Nobody else had a double-wide driveway. And I remember there was a time when our grade school teacher, a lady named Bertha Buckner, came down the hill and forbid the kids from ever playing a game over noon hour, even though they were off school property. And if you went and you argued with your parents about that she had no right to do that, you were on the losing side of that battle. So, plus I felt like Rose Ferenstein was just as happy anyway that we weren't playing games at her house over noon hours. But I remember events, the things that you remember the most generally and not specifically, Ben, are the how close your houses were to each other, and how close your families were to each other, and that the expectation levels for all the kids was basically the same. So if we were all fairly not all that well off, but nobody knew it because everybody was the same, and everybody was going to send their kid away to high school and to college to be a doctor or a lawyer or something or other. And for the most part, that's how our generation of kids got to be the way we are, because in a way we didn't know any different. We didn't know that there were any other options other than to be a professional or to do the few sorts of things that your parents had in mind for you at the time. And I've never had a second thought about that, gee, I should have thought about more options, because it worked out okay. And so they were very smart people. We succeeded as a family, even though my mother worked almost all the time during our growing up years. She was both a legal secretary and then later was a lawyer for many years for the Omaha Legal Aid Society, and where she helped lots and lots and lots of people, more than anybody will ever know. But she always found time to do all of the right things for the family. She was present. We always had dinner on the table. We always did things as a family. But her calling was such that this is what she wanted to do. Just like my father's calling is that he always wanted to be a judge. He didn't want to do anything different. So I always was very proud of them that they followed their passion that way. I don't know that I've answered your question, other than there's so many little things that you remember about, in any family, Ben, about growing up, all the good times you had together and all the little fights you used to have, and none of them are all that important other than we got through it all, and I think had a very good upbringing.
What is the personal side of your relationship with your father?
Well, we were very close, always were very close. Much like my mother's father, I was his favorite grandchild because I was the firstborn grandkid. I think that my dad and I not only kind of looked alike, but we were extremely close. As a matter of fact, when I passed the California bar examination, he was the one who swore me into the California bar because he could. When I married my wife, Marcia, in 1981, May 17th, my dad performed the ceremony because he could and he wanted to. We were just as close as we could be, and I don't remember us all those years ever having really any arguments. I could say he loved me like a son, but I was his son, and but he shepherded me at the beginning of my practice. He always cared about what I was doing. He was always there for Boy Scout events. He was at one, even though he didn't know how to put up a tent or put down a cot, he always went to Camp Cedars or Camp Eagle when we were growing up out in Fremont, and would weather the storms and go through it with me, because that was the thing that you did.
And how about on your mother, your relationship with your mother?
My relationship with my mother was always good too. What's hard for me to talk about, Ben, is this, that my mother has had this terrible disease, this Alzheimer's disease, and started exhibiting signs of it probably in 1988 or 1989. So at this point in time, it's now been 18 years, and it's kind of difficult for me to remember her the way I should remember her. But she was, as I think everybody knows, an extremely intelligent, dedicated woman. Graduated from high school, I think, when she was 15 or 16 years old. Always graduated first in her class. But she used all of that intelligence and all of that goodness for her whole life to help other people, and was always extremely busy, was always the head of the Omaha PTA, the whole organization of Parents and Teachers Association, was a board member and president of about every women's professional organization that you could think of, and she, a tremendously vibrant, caring, loving woman. And what's hard for me to talk about, frankly, in this interview is how what's happened over the last 18 years, and the fact that as time has waned away, how difficult it is to remember her like that in the good years.
Do you feel, Bruce, that your practice of law, how was it influenced by your father and mother?
I would like to say that it was greatly influenced by it, but it really wasn't. My parents kept kind of a watchful eye as to how I was developing in the practice, and they never would let me get out of line. But as far as education and growth and where you end up as that part of the practice, they actually had very little to do with that, Ben. I'd like to tell you otherwise, but I'd be lying.
All right, let's go back and talk about those 60s when you were going to school in California. What was Bruce Brodkey like then?
Taller, thinner, and had more hair. And I'm not saying anything else. No, those were very much growing years for me. And of course, it started when I started at Berkeley in 1964. I don't know if you remember or not, but that was the first year of the free speech movement. It also was probably the second year of real active engagement in the Vietnam War. It was at it was at the beginnings of the time of, for lack of a better word, the women's movement started. It was at the time when racial equality and social injustice were bigger issues, maybe, and are still big issues, but there were bigger issues then than they are now. So it was a confluence at that time of a lot of issues that came together at one point in time. And when you were 18 years old, it was kind of hard to sort out what trends and where you ought to be and whose side of the fence you ought to be on. And so those few years that I was an undergraduate there saw the growth of these various movements, which everybody had called the movement, but it was really a lot of different stuff. And so I was a part of that during my undergraduate years, and then into graduate school too, because when I graduated in 1971, we were still very much involved in the overseas war in Vietnam, and didn't start extricating ourselves from that until 1974, 1975. So those were very interesting years. I met a lot of rock group people during that time.
What about your high school years? What were they like?
They were maybe the best years, oddly, the best years, because I think that I had the teachers during high school that had the greatest influence on me of any set of teachers I ever had. Teachers that really cared about the kids and really took interest in making sure that you kind of ended up being where you should have been. I remember, and with great fondness, some of my math teachers like Dwayne Perry and Virginia Lee Pratt, who made mathematics a lot of fun. My physics teachers like John Bush, or not John Bush, Mr. Bush. We never called him by his first name. I don't even know what his first name was now. But we had him for physics advanced placement for a couple of years, and he was just a swell guy. Chemistry, English, Spanish. I don't think you could have gotten, I know this is an overused statement, but I don't think you could have gotten a better high school education than what we got. And the problem was we didn't know how fortunate we were at the time to have gotten the education we got, because we had superlative teachers, just superlative teachers. To this day, on the social side, then some of the friends who I'm still best friends with, even 45 years later, are people who were in my graduating class in high school, and including your cousin. And so it is remarkable to me that over that many years that you can see the beginnings of these relationships back in your high school days, and to say, you know, I'm still friends with 4 or 5 or 10 people that you knew back then is a remarkable event. It shows how dedicated they are to our friendship, that they would allow me to stay being a friend for that long.
Bruce, I'd like to hear about your sister and your brother and their families.
I'll be happy to. I'm working my way all the way back to where I started. After my sister, actually my sister was married to a fellow named Peter, who was also a physician. They went to school together at Penn Med. And after they married, they had a daughter. His name is Emily. Emily, I think, was born in about 1970, and she's graduated from Harvard like my sister did for undergraduate, and I think with very high honors. She now lives in New York City, and as I said, my sister still has an active and thriving psychiatric practice at various hospitals in Philadelphia. And I don't know if or when she will ever retire, but I know she's pretty happy doing what she's doing. My brother graduated from wait a minute, he went to Cornell. He may have graduated from Creighton University undergraduate. I never could quite figure that out. He then went to Creighton Medical School, where he did very, very well. In fact, when he took his medical boards to go on to your residency, I believe he got the highest score ever recorded in the history of the United States. As a matter of fact, on a test that went from 200 to 800, his score was 820, which they never did quite understand how it happened, but it would have affected the national mean. So my brother was born very, very, very smart, and did nothing through his education to be any different from that. He then went to the University of Wisconsin Medical School, and after graduating from the Wisconsin Medical School, he stayed in a place called Janesville, Wisconsin, which was in our day, the home of the Parker Pen Company and the General Motors plant. I don't know what is there now, but he's been there for a good number of years. He married in about 1989 or 1990. He married Karen Hirsch, and they have a number of children, one of whom is older and was in rabbinic school, named Megan, and then they have 5 or 6 other little ones they've been happily married and have lived up there for a good number of years.
Do you get to see them occasionally on family occasions, or?
Very, very rarely. Very rarely. I think he's about as busy up there as I am down here. He'll come down occasionally to visit my mother, as will my sister. It's not an easy task to get here frequently, so they'll come in just occasionally.
Now I want to hear about you and the meeting when you met your wife.
Well, that is a story that is not of much interest to me, except to me and her, but it is kind of a funny story. In 1980, I was out playing basketball sometime like in August, or maybe it was late July, early August, and I got a call from a friend of mine asking me to come over because they were having strawberry shortcake. And I said, well, I have to take a shower before I come over. He says, no, the shortcake will be gone. You got to come over right now. I said, well, I'm schwitzing all over myself. He says, come over right now. I don't care what you look like. So I go over to this fellow's house, who will remain anonymous on this tape because I don't want to incriminate him. Yeah, and I got over to the house, and it turns out they're having a party. And there are like 25, 30 people there, and they're all dressed up. And here I am in a t-shirt and a pair of gym shorts and tennis shoes. And I had some shortcake, and I saw a lady across the room who had very, very beautiful eyes, which is what I remember. And I said, it's too bad she's talking to that guy. And I talked to her for a little while, and she seemed very nice and seemed like she was interested in what I had to say. But then within an hour or so, I don't know whether she'll disagree with this or not, but she walked out the door with the guy who was talking to her. Well, it turns out she lived in the cul-de-sac. This other guy lived in another house in the cul-de-sac, and they were just friends, but I thought they were married or engaged. So ultimately, I found out her name, Marcia Hoffman, and we ended up going out to dinner, and the rest is history. Since 1981, we were engaged for a very short period of time and then got married. What's very interesting about this is that we decided that we would have our first date at that was then called La Fonda de Acebo, or no, the Holly Inn, which became La Fonda de Acebo. And she was very, very happy to go there. What I didn't know until after we ate is that she hated Mexican food, but went anyway because she thought I was a pretty nice guy. And that may be the highest compliment that I could ever get. By the way, we've never gone to a Mexican restaurant again. So, Marcia is a very, very talented person. She was she is a PhD. She's an adult nurse practitioner. She's a geriatric nurse practitioner, and was for a number of years both on the faculty at the graduate school at UNMC, and then after that became the associate director of occupational medicine at the University Hospital. So she's an extremely bright and talented person. In 1997, when I went to Israel, she quit that job. And then at that time, we had already gotten into the floor covering business, and I'd been in that since about 1995, or we'd been in that since 1995. And she was out of work for a couple of years, but then the opportunity arose in 1999 for her to take over something totally foreign to her, which was taking over the floor covering business. And she has run that with great zeal and with great effectiveness since 1999. So she didn't come from any kind of a retail background at all, but she was thrown into an enormous retail issue here, and she's handled it with great aplomb, and all the credit in the world goes to her. And we've been married now for almost 27 years. It doesn't seem possible. I had asked Ben we went off the air here for a minute, and I asked my good friend Ben Nachman to let me talk about a little bit about my parents' generation. And because those are things that are now blessed memories to me. My mother's mother was one of 6, and I knew all of my great aunts except, well, there was they were Clara Robinson, Lena Green, my grandmother, Pearl Stark, Ann Finkelstein, and Bess Stern. I never knew my great aunt, Clara, and I really don't know anything about her, but I knew that part of the family intimately, and I knew each one of those people intimately, and spent a lot of times on trips and on family holidays and on religious holidays with each of them, and their passing was a source of grief to me in each instance, because we were on that side of the family. That plus all of their husbands, they were very, very good people and very nice people, and I certainly miss all of them. Particularly, I miss my Uncle Ben Stern, who was maybe the smartest man I ever met and the most decent. And we could spend another hour talking about that, but I'm not going to do that. On my, and then of course, my mother herself, there were 6 in her family. My Uncle Julius is many years in Omaha. Julius Rothcup is now deceased. Then was my mother and my Aunt Pauline, and Siegel, and my Aunt Harriet Starr, and my Uncle Teddy Rothcup, and my Aunt Louise Meyer from Nashville. I don't know if I got them all or not, but with this, that was really, that whole family, that plus the great aunts, was really the family environment in which I was raised. And each one of them in their own way very much was a positive effect in my life. I don't know if I told them all that, and this is not meant to just be unburdening myself, but that's kind of who you are, is made up by all the people and all the memories that you have. On my father's side, he had 2 brothers, and the oldest brother and youngest brother were 20 years apart. My Uncle Ed, my father's older brother, lived in Chicago most of his life, and he was a professor, and then for a short period of time the dean of the John Marshall Law School in Chicago. My Uncle Ed and my Aunt Sis lived in downtown Chicago for most of the latter part of their life, and they're great people. My Uncle Larry and my Aunt Gloria live in Omaha, and my Uncle Larry, of course, was a lawyer and a guy who I was very close to when I was a kid. Took me on lots of trips on exotic places like Denver and Des Moines, and always he had an old Studebaker car that was then a new Studebaker car that I really liked. But he was extremely influential and was closer to my age by far than my father was. The difference in age was my father's older brother, I believe, was 6.5 years older than my dad, and my Uncle Larry was 13.5 years younger to the day than my dad, so there was like a 20-year difference in the family. And so I do remember my Harry Aaron Brodkey, who I referred to earlier, was born in 1879, died in 1949. So he was just about 70 years old when he passed away, and I was born in 1946. What I have no real visual memories of him, but I remember I have a sensory feeling for when I was a very little kid, him holding me by the hand and walking around his house. And I remember distinctly, my earliest childhood memory was when he was on his deathbed, dying of nephritis, him holding me, which was not only tender, but it's actually my earliest childhood memory. So I never got to know him very well. I knew my grandmother fairly well. She lived until I was in college, and we weren't real close with her, but I knew her fairly well. My Zadie, my mother's father, Harry Rothcup, he and I, as I mentioned, were really quite close. As a kid, he used to come over, when I was a kid, he used to come over and try to sneak a $2 bill into my hand frequently as a gift, and my mother would make him take it back, and then he'd put it in my back pocket anyway, and he'd say, here's your horse track money. He had a well-known luggage store when I was a kid called Nebraska Luggage, which was located on about where the city-county building is now, on about 18th or 19th and Farnham Street. And I'd go down and visit him and his sister, my Aunt Rose, and they'd always take me up to Harkett's, which was up on, was it 19th or 20th Street, and he'd always give me a little, like a quarter for a hamburger, and I thought he was my hero. And he always spent about half of his day down at the luggage store. The other half of the day he'd go down and see the Goldston boys down at the Northrop Jones. I'm having trouble coming up with the name, Northrop Jones, and they'd sit there about half the day talking Yiddish, and he'd spend the next half of the day coming up and talking to me in English, so that's how I picked up the little Yiddish that I know. I do remember with great fondness, though, that he was not well, but was able to show up for my bar mitzvah, which was in 1959, and he helped kind of conduct things, as was his wont, up on the bima. And he died a couple of years after that. My grandmother, his wife, she died in 1953, so I didn't really know her all that well. But like I say, I knew her sisters actually a lot better than I knew my own grandmother. So I wanted to run through those few things because I thought they were kind of important.
In growing up, Bruce, what was religion like around the house? Synagogues?
Reform, basic reform. You did holidays and you went to services once or twice a week, went to Hebrew school once or twice a week. And it was important, but not overwhelmingly orthodox. And that's the best way to describe it, I think. We got a regular reform education, which probably at that time wasn't a lot, but some of my very best memories are from the teachers and the rabbis that I dealt with. I didn't go back to anybody before Lou Silberman, but I remember Rabbi Silberman. Sidney Brooks obviously was a very close family friend, and somebody who was a rabbi to me. He was my teacher, my master. I remember the Maury Schwartzes of the world, who was the director of the religious education and tried to teach these not too smart kids Hebrew. And Manfred Kuttner, who was the cantor for many years. There was a close friend, and also I had a good enough voice that he had me sing in these other big events that they had. So I have wonderful memories of him, and of course Ida Gitlin, who always thought that I was kind of her son, and she always looked out after me, and I think sometimes still is. So.
How about holiday dinners? Was there much of that among the family?
Always. We would always have, even in our small house, when it came down for any kind of, whether it was Pesach or break the fast or anything of that nature. We always had family dinners. They used to be, actually, when my grandfather was around, they were actually quite orthodox. And when I remember to this day, when I was a young kid, and I didn't have a yarmulke, but I wore a little Cub Scout cap, I ended up at my Uncle Barney and Aunt Pearl's house for the Seder dinner, and I was told that I was going to do Manishtana, and I had no idea that I could do it. And then these wizened older people were reading Hebrew in rounds, going all the way around the table, and this went on for seemingly hours. And I probably was about 8 years old, and finally my Zadie turned to me and he says, "It's up to you, go ahead." And I slid under the table and I couldn't say anything. So they figured this is a true story, I'm not making this up. So later on they figured there's got to be something this kid can do because he ain't too smart. So they sent me out to the kitchen, the back door to the kitchen in this apartment, to let Elijah in. And I went to the back door and I opened the door and there was somebody knocking on the door. And I said, "Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I don't think so." He said, "I'm just here for dinner." So I couldn't even let Elijah in, right? That is absolutely one of the fun, and of course many years later you laugh about it, but at the time it was horrifying. It was a day that I could do nothing right. So, but we did spend particularly my mother's side of the family, we had lots of wonderful get-togethers and when they had religious holiday celebrations. You know, we've spent about an hour going through this, and there's so many little things in your life you can't just that are of importance to you, but really not to anybody else. That could be subject for hours and hours of conversations. But I think that in terms of our family history and what people do and how accomplished they are, and what good people that they are, I've covered most of the bases. I did want to conclude, though, by telling Marcia, and I'm not going anywhere soon, but I wanted to tell you how much that I do love you, and thank you for putting up with me for well over a quarter of a century now. And you look much younger every day, and I'm become an altar cocker. So it's thank you for sticking in there with me. I think that's about all.